On a bright October morning in 1971, in a quiet neighborhood outside Sacramento, California, a young woman named Diana Hartwell vanished from her own backyard while hanging laundry on the line. Her husband reported her missing that evening when he returned from work. Her 2-year-old daughter was found alone in the house, unharmed but unable to explain where her mother had gone. The clothesline still held damp sheets that swayed in the afternoon breeze. A wicker basket sat overturned in the grass. And Diana, 23 years old with her whole life stretching before her, was simply gone. For 40 years, her disappearance remained an unsolved mystery, a cold case that haunted investigators and fractured a family. Then, in 2011, a single statement changed everything and revealed a truth that had been hiding in plain sight all along. What really happened to Diana Hartwell on that autumn morning? The town of Carmichael in 1971 sat on the eastern edge of Sacramento County, a sprawling collection of modest ranch homes and newly planted saplings that had sprung up in the post-war housing boom. The streets were wide and flat, lined with young trees that barely provided shade. Lawns were still being established, patches of green fighting against the California dust. The American River ran through the area, its banks thick with cottonwoods and willows, a cool corridor cutting through the dry landscape. In October, the heat of summer had finally broken, and the mornings carried that particular crispness that made people believe autumn had truly arrived. The Hartwells lived on Sycamore Lane, a street of single-story homes with attached garages and chain-link fences separating one yard from another. Theirs was a cream-colored house with brown trim, identical to dozens of others in the development. A young elm tree grew in the front yard, its trunk still thin enough to wrap your hand around. The grass was patchy, worn down in places where their daughter, Emily, played with her plastic toys. A metal swing set stood in the backyard, its chains squeaking whenever the wind picked up. Diana Marie Hartwell was 23 years old that October. She had grown up in Fresno, the daughter of a school teacher and a man who worked at the rail yard. She had light brown hair that she wore long, often pulled back in a ponytail, and a quiet way about her that people remembered. Those who knew her said she was soft-spoken, almost shy, the kind of person who listened more than she talked. She had met Robert Hartwell at a church social in 1968 when she was 20 and he was 25. They married 6 months later. Emily was born the following year, in March of 1969, a healthy baby girl with her mother's light hair and her father's dark eyes. Robert Hartwell worked as a purchasing clerk at an electronics supply company in Sacramento, a 40-minute drive from their home. He left for work each morning at 7:30, his routine as predictable as clockwork. He wore short-sleeved dress shirts and narrow ties, carried his lunch in a metal box, and drove a light blue Ford sedan that he washed every Saturday morning. Those who knew him said he was particular about things, liked order and routine, didn't care much for surprises or deviations from his schedule. Diana's days followed their own pattern. She woke when Emily woke, usually around 6:30. She made breakfast, simple things, oatmeal, toast with jam, orange juice from a can. She cleaned the house, did the laundry, prepared dinner. She watched soap operas in the afternoon while Emily napped. She spoke on the phone with her mother every Tuesday and Thursday. On weekends, the family attended church services and sometimes visited Robert's parents, who lived in Roseville. It was an ordinary life, the kind thousands of young families were living in developments across California, unremarkable, predictable, safe. October 12, 1971 was a Tuesday. The morning dawned clear and cool, the sky that deep blue that only comes in autumn. Robert left for work at his usual time. Diana stood at the kitchen window and watched him back out of the driveway, the way she did every morning. Emily was already awake, sitting in her high chair with pieces of banana on the tray in front of her. The radio played softly from the counter, a morning talk show that Diana only half listened to. The neighbor across the street, a woman named Patricia Corso, saw Diana outside around 9 o'clock that morning. Diana was wearing blue jeans and a yellow short-sleeved blouse. She was carrying a wicker laundry basket, making her way to the clothesline that stretched across the backyard. Patricia was watering her roses and called out a greeting. Diana waved back, that small wave people give when they're being friendly but don't want to stop for conversation. Patricia remembered that detail later, that small wave, the last time anyone besides her husband would report seeing Diana Hartwell alive. Clear's throat, Emily was playing in the house, visible through the sliding glass door that led from the kitchen to the backyard. Diana had left the door open, so she could hear her daughter while she worked outside. The morning was quiet, the way weekday mornings are in residential neighborhoods when most people are at work and children are not yet home from school. A dog barked somewhere down the street. A lawn mower hummed in the distance, the ordinary sounds of an ordinary morning. What happened next remains, even now, a matter of dispute and shadow. What is known for certain is this. Sometime between 9 o'clock, when Patricia Corso saw Diana hanging laundry, and 5:45 in the evening, when Robert Hartwell returned home from work, Diana disappeared. The clothesline still held sheets, pillowcases, several of Emily's small dresses, and 2 of Robert's work shirts. The wicker basket lay on its side in the grass, several clothespins scattered around it. The sliding glass door remained open. Emily was inside the house, alone. Robert's first call was to Diana's mother at 6:15 that evening. He asked if Diana was there, if she had driven down to Fresno without telling him. His voice was calm, just slightly annoyed, the tone of someone dealing with a minor inconvenience. Diana's mother said no, she hadn't heard from Diana since their last phone call on Thursday. Robert hung up and called Diana's only close friend in the neighborhood, a woman named Janet Lewis who lived 3 streets over. Janet hadn't seen Diana that day. Robert hung up again. At 6:45, Robert Hartwell called the Sacramento County authorities to report his wife missing. The deputy who took the call noted that Robert sounded composed, perhaps worried, but not frantic. He reported the facts methodically. His wife was gone, their daughter was alone, the back door was open, the laundry was unfinished. He provided Diana's description, what she had been wearing that morning when he had last seen her. He asked what he should do. Deputies arrived at the Hartwell home at 7:20 that evening. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard. The sheets on the clothesline moved gently in the breeze, making soft snapping sounds. The house lights were on inside, warm yellow rectangles in the gathering darkness. Robert met the deputies at the front door, holding Emily on his hip. The child was quiet, her thumb in her mouth, her head resting against her father's shoulder. The deputies walked through the house first. Everything was orderly. The breakfast dishes had been washed and put away. The beds were made. Emily's toys were scattered in the living room, blocks and plastic animals, and a small wooden truck lying on its side. In the kitchen, the beginnings of dinner sat on the counter. A package of ground meat, still wrapped, an onion beside it, a can of tomato sauce. The sliding glass door remained open, just as Robert had found it. In the backyard, the deputies examined the scene carefully. The grass showed no obvious signs of struggle. The wicker basket, when they lifted it, revealed nothing underneath except slightly flattened grass. They collected the clothespins, though they didn't know what they were collecting them for. One deputy noted in his report that the laundry on the line was completely dry by that time, stiff in the evening air. He wondered how long it had been hanging there. They walked the perimeter of the yard, looking for anything out of place. The chain-link fence was intact, the gate closed but not latched. Beyond the fence, a narrow greenbelt separated this row of houses from the next street over. The greenbelt was thick with weeds and scattered trash, a drainage ditch running through the middle of it. They would search it more thoroughly in the morning, when they had light. That night, deputies knocked on every door on Sycamore Lane and the surrounding streets. Had anyone seen Diana Hartwell that day? Had anyone noticed any unusual vehicles in the neighborhood? Any strangers? Any commotion? Any sounds of distress? Patricia Corso told them about seeing Diana around 9 o'clock, hanging laundry, waving to her. A man 2 houses down said he had been home all day, working in his garage, but hadn't heard or seen anything unusual. A teenage boy said he had ridden his bike through the neighborhood around 3 o'clock and hadn't noticed anything strange. The responses were all the same, nothing unusual, nothing out of place, just another quiet Tuesday in Carmichael. The search began in earnest Wednesday morning. Deputies organized into teams, methodically working outward from the Hartwell house. They walked the greenbelt behind the property, pushing through the tall grass and brambles, checking the drainage ditch. They searched the areas near the American River, knowing that people sometimes wandered there, though it was a considerable distance from Sycamore Lane. Volunteers from the community joined the effort, neighbors and church members, and people who had simply heard about the missing young mother and wanted to help. They formed long lines and walked through fields, calling Diana's name, looking for any sign of her. For those who have ever searched for someone who has vanished, there is a particular quality to the experience. Every scrap of cloth glimpsed through the weeds makes your heart stop. Every mound of earth becomes something it is not. You look, and you find nothing, and the nothing is somehow worse than finding something terrible. At least something terrible would be an answer. Robert Hartwell stayed home with Emily during the search. Deputies suggested he remain available in case Diana tried to make contact, in case she returned. He stayed in the house, answering the phone each time it rang, hoping for news. His parents came to stay with him, to help with Emily, to wait with him through those long hours. Those who spoke with Robert during those first days said he seemed numb, shocked, as if he couldn't quite process what was happening. He kept saying Diana wouldn't just leave. She would never leave Emily. Something must have happened to her. The investigation, as it unfolded over those first weeks, began to focus on several possibilities. The first and most obvious was abduction. Had someone taken Diana from her own backyard? But there was no sign of struggle, no witnesses who had seen or heard anything. The second possibility was that Diana had left voluntarily, perhaps walked away from her life. Though her purse and wallet were still in the house, her car was in the garage. And everyone who knew her said such a thing would be unthinkable. The third possibility, the one that deputies whispered quietly among themselves, was that something had happened inside the house, something that had been staged to look like a disappearance. They began to look more carefully at the timeline. Part 2. The investigation. The lead investigator on the case was Detective Frank Morrison, a 20-year veteran of the Sacramento County Investigative Division. He had worked dozens of missing persons cases, and he knew the statistics. When a woman disappeared, especially a young married woman, the first person you looked at was always the husband. Not because all husbands were guilty, but because statistically, intimately known individuals were the most likely perpetrators. It was a simple matter of probability and access. Detective Morrison sat down with Robert Hartwell 3 times during that first week. The interviews were calm, methodical, each question carefully worded. Robert answered everything, his voice steady, his story consistent. He had left for work at 7:30, his normal time. He had driven to Sacramento, arrived at his office around 8:15. He had worked a full day, taking his lunch at his desk as he often did. He had left work at 5:15, stopped for gas on the way home, arrived at the house at 5:45. He had called out for Diana when he entered through the front door. When she didn't answer, he had walked through the house. Emily was in the living room playing with blocks. The sliding glass door was open. Diana was nowhere to be found. "Did you argue that morning?" Detective Morrison asked during the second interview. "No," Robert said. "Everything was normal. Everything was fine." "Did Diana ever talk about leaving, about needing space, about being unhappy?" "Never," Robert said. "She loved our life. She loved Emily. She would never leave." "Did she have any enemies, anyone who might want to hurt her?" "No, everyone liked Diana. She was quiet. She didn't make trouble with anyone." Detective Morrison made careful notes. He observed Robert's body language, his facial expressions, the way he sat with his hands folded on the table in front of him. Robert never looked away. He never fidgeted. He answered every question with that same calm steadiness, as if he were reciting facts from a report rather than discussing his missing wife. Those who knew him said Robert had always been like that, even-keeled, unemotional, not the type to show what he was feeling. Some people interpreted it as shock. Others wondered if it was something else. Clear's throat, the physical evidence was minimal. There were no signs of forced entry at the house. No broken windows, no damaged locks, no marks on the door frames. The back gate had been closed but not latched, which Robert said was normal. Diana often left it that way when she was going in and out, hanging laundry or letting Emily play in the yard. The wicker basket showed no signs of struggle, no scratches or damage. The clothesline itself was intact, the wire still taut between its posts. Deputies had dusted for fingerprints throughout the house, but found only what you would expect to find: Diana's prints, Robert's prints, Emily's small prints. A few unidentified prints that likely belonged to recent visitors. Nothing suspicious, nothing out of place. They processed Robert's car on the third day. They went through it carefully, checking the trunk, the interior, looking for any sign that it had been used to transport Diana, voluntarily or otherwise. The car was clean, almost meticulously so. Robert said he had washed it the previous Saturday, as he did every Saturday. The odometer showed mileage consistent with his daily commute. There was nothing unusual, nothing that raised red flags. But there were small things that Detective Morrison noted in his reports, small inconsistencies that didn't prove anything but didn't feel quite right either. The first was the matter of the laundry. Patricia Corso, the neighbor, said she had seen Diana outside around 9 o'clock. The laundry on the line had been completely dry when deputies arrived at 7:20 that evening. Detective Morrison timed how long it took laundry to dry on a similar day, with similar weather conditions. Sheets and clothing hung on a line in October, with low humidity and a light breeze, would typically dry in 3 to 4 hours. If Diana had hung the laundry around 9 o'clock, it would have been dry by 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That meant Diana had likely disappeared sometime in the late morning or early afternoon, not later in the day. The second inconsistency was Emily. The child had been alone in the house for potentially 6 or 7 hours before her father arrived home, yet she had not cried herself sick. She had not injured herself trying to get out of the house. She had not soiled herself beyond what you would expect from a toddler in diapers. When Robert found her, she had been playing quietly with her blocks, as if she were accustomed to being alone, as if it were normal. Detective Morrison requested the medical records from Emily's pediatrician. Had there been any signs of neglect or unusual injuries? The records showed routine checkups, normal development, no red flags. But Diana's obstetrician had a different story. Diana had been 4 months pregnant when she disappeared. The pregnancy had been confirmed at an appointment 6 weeks earlier. She had been scheduled for another checkup the following week, an appointment she would never keep. Robert had not mentioned the pregnancy when he first reported Diana missing. When Detective Morrison asked him about it during their third interview, Robert's expression flickered, just for a moment, something that might have been surprise or might have been something else. "I didn't think it was relevant," Robert said. "We were keeping it quiet until she was further along. We hadn't told many people yet." "How did Diana feel about the pregnancy?" Detective Morrison asked. "She was happy," Robert said. "We both were. We wanted Emily to have a sibling. No concerns. No worries about having another child." "None," Robert said, but Diana's mother told a different story. She said Diana had called her the week before she disappeared, crying, saying she didn't know how they were going to manage with another child. Robert's job didn't pay much. They were already struggling to make ends meet. The house was small. Emily was only 2, still needed so much attention. Diana had sounded overwhelmed, frightened even, her mother said. She had sounded like someone who was drowning and didn't know how to ask for help. The timeline discrepancies continued to bother Detective Morrison. Robert said he had left work at 5:15. The drive from Sacramento to Carmichael was approximately 40 minutes at that time of day, accounting for traffic. If Robert had left at 5:15, he should have arrived home around 5:55, perhaps 6 o'clock, but he claimed he had arrived at 5:45. The gas station stop he mentioned would have added time, not saved it. When Morrison checked with the gas station, they had no records from that day that could confirm Robert's stop. The station was cash only, and they didn't keep detailed logs. Morrison drove the route himself, leaving Sacramento at 5:15 on a Tuesday evening, stopping for gas at the station Robert had mentioned. Even with minimal traffic and a quick gas stop, the drive took him 50 minutes. There was no way Robert had made it home by 5:45, unless he had left work earlier than he claimed or had been driving at unsafe speeds. When Morrison confronted Robert with this discrepancy in their fourth interview, Robert frowned, thought for a moment, then said he must have remembered the time wrong. Maybe he had gotten home at 6 o'clock, not 5:45. Maybe he had left work at 5 o'clock instead of 5:15. The details were fuzzy, Robert said. He had been distracted, worried about Diana. But this was a man who lived by routine, who prided himself on punctuality and precision. Those who worked with Robert said he always left at exactly 5:15, that you could set your watch by him. Yet now he was uncertain about the timing on the most important day of his life. The community search continued for 2 weeks. Volunteers walked through every accessible area within a 5-mile radius of the Hartwell home. They checked culverts, drainage ditches, abandoned buildings, wooded areas near the river. They distributed flyers with Diana's photograph, that image of her from her wedding day, smiling slightly, her eyes looking just past the camera. The flyers were posted in grocery stores, at gas stations, on telephone poles throughout Sacramento County. Tips came in, as they always do in cases like this. Someone thought they saw a woman matching Diana's description at a bus station in Stockton. Someone else reported seeing her at a grocery store in Davis. None of the sightings led anywhere. None of them were Diana. As the weeks turned into a month, the search effort diminished. Volunteers returned to their regular lives. The media coverage faded. Detective Morrison kept working the case, but there was nowhere left to look, no new evidence to analyze, no witnesses who could add anything meaningful. The case settled into that frustrating state that investigators dread. No body, no evidence of foul play, no clear suspect despite strong suspicions, no way forward. Robert Hartwell returned to work in November. His parents continued to help with Emily. The house on Sycamore Lane remained as it had been, Diana's clothes still hanging in the closet, her toothbrush still in the bathroom, her wedding ring sitting in a small dish on the dresser. Robert told people he was keeping everything the way it was in case Diana came home. He refused to believe she was gone forever. He kept saying she would return. But to Detective Morrison and the other investigators, the case was beginning to look like something else entirely. They believed, though they could not prove, that Diana Hartwell had never left that house alive. They believed her disappearance had been carefully staged, made to look like an abduction or a voluntary departure, when it was actually something much darker. They believed Robert Hartwell knew exactly what had happened to his wife. They just couldn't prove it. The case went cold not because investigators stopped caring, but because there was nowhere else to go. Without a body, without physical evidence, without witnesses, there was no case to bring to a prosecutor. All they had were suspicions, inconsistencies, the nagging sense that something about Robert's story didn't add up. And in the American justice system, suspicions are not enough. Detective Morrison kept the case file on his desk for another year, before finally moving it to the cold case storage. He wrote in his final report, "All available evidence suggests Diana Hartwell met with foul play on or about October 12, 1971. Primary person of interest is her husband, Robert Hartwell. However, without physical evidence or witness testimony, case cannot proceed to prosecution. File remains open pending new information." The file sat in storage for 40 years. Part 3. The silence. By the spring of 1972, 6 months after Diana's disappearance, Robert Hartwell had made a decision. He told his family he couldn't stay in Carmichael any longer. The memories were too painful, he said. Everywhere he looked, he saw Diana. The house felt like a tomb, he said. He needed a fresh start for himself and for Emily. In April of 1972, Robert put the house on Sycamore Lane up for sale. It sold within 3 weeks. He took a new job with an electronics company in San Jose, nearly 2 hours south of Sacramento. He packed up everything he owned, loaded it into a moving truck, and left. Diana's mother begged him to leave Diana's belongings with her, the photographs, the clothing, the small personal items that were all she had left of her daughter. Robert agreed to leave a few photographs but packed the rest. He said he still believed Diana would come back someday, and when she did, she would want her things. San Jose in 1972 was a city in transition, the early stirrings of what would become Silicon Valley beginning to transform the landscape. Robert rented a small apartment in a complex near his new workplace. He hired a babysitter to watch Emily while he worked. He established a new routine, as precise and predictable as the old one. He drove Emily to the babysitter's house each morning at 7:15. He worked until 5:15. He picked Emily up at 5:45. They ate dinner together, watched television, went to bed at the same time every night. Emily was 3 years old now, old enough to talk, to ask questions. She asked about her mother sometimes, in that simple way children have, as if asking what happened to a toy that had been put away. "Where's Mommy?" she would say. Robert would tell her that Mommy had to go away, that Mommy loved her very much, that maybe someday Mommy would come back. Those who knew Emily during those years said she was a quiet child, withdrawn, the kind of child who played alone and didn't make much noise. She started preschool in the fall of 1972, and her teachers noted that she rarely spoke unless spoken to. She didn't play with the other children. She sat by herself during free time, drawing pictures or staring out the window. When teachers asked her to draw her family, she would draw herself and a man she labeled Daddy. She never drew her mother. Robert remarried in 1974. The woman was named Carol, and she worked as a secretary at Robert's company. They had met in the break room, bonded over coffee and conversations about work. Carol knew about Diana, knew about the disappearance and the unsolved case, but Robert told her he had moved on, that he needed to think about the future, not the past. They married in a simple civil ceremony. Carol moved into the apartment with Robert and Emily. The relationship between Emily and Carol was strained from the beginning. Emily, now 5 years old, didn't want a new mother. She would hide when Carol tried to talk to her. She would refuse to eat meals Carol prepared. She would cry at night, calling for her real mother, the mother she could barely remember anymore but knew was supposed to be there. Carol tried to be patient, tried to understand, but it was difficult. She hadn't signed up to be a mother to a traumatized child who resented her very existence. Robert's response to these difficulties was to become more rigid, more controlling. He established stricter rules for Emily, earlier bedtimes, no television unless she finished all her dinner, no playing until her room was clean. He said he was teaching her discipline, that she needed structure. Carol wondered if it was something else, if Robert was punishing Emily for something, though she couldn't imagine what. The marriage lasted 3 years. By 1977, Carol had had enough. She filed for separation, citing irreconcilable differences. She told her friends later that there was something wrong in that house, something she couldn't quite name. Robert was too controlled, too emotionless. Emily was too frightened, too quiet. The whole situation felt wrong, felt dark, like there were secrets buried beneath the surface that Carol didn't want to unearth. After the separation, it was just Robert and Emily again. Emily was 8 years old now, in 3rd grade. She had learned to be invisible, to not make noise, to not draw attention to herself. Her teachers described her as a good student who never caused trouble and never asked for help. She sat in the middle of the classroom, did her work quietly, and left as soon as the bell rang. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, ever felt in your bones that something terrible has happened but have no way to prove it, no way to make others see what you see, you understand the torture of it. Emily lived with that doubt every day of her childhood. She couldn't remember what had happened that October morning in 1971. She had been too young, barely 2 years old, but some part of her knew. Some deep, buried part of her consciousness understood that her mother hadn't simply left, that something awful had happened in that house on Sycamore Lane. She had nightmares. In the dreams, she was small again, sitting on the living room floor with her blocks. She could hear sounds from the kitchen, her mother's voice, then her father's voice, then silence. In the dreams, she wanted to go see what was happening, but her legs wouldn't move. She was frozen there on the floor, unable to help, unable to even cry out. She would wake from these dreams gasping, her heart pounding, and her father would be standing in her doorway watching her. "Just a dream," he would say. "Go back to sleep." When Emily was 12, she started drawing again, not the simple crayon pictures of childhood but detailed pencil sketches. She drew trees with twisted branches. She drew houses with dark windows. She drew a woman lying on the ground, her hair spread around her head like a halo, her eyes closed. She drew these pictures obsessively, filling sketchbook after sketchbook, hiding them under her mattress where her father wouldn't find them. Robert's work took him to various electronics companies throughout the 1980s. He changed jobs every few years, always moving to a different city, a different apartment. Emily changed schools 6 times before she graduated from high school. She never had close friends, never stayed anywhere long enough to build those bonds. She learned to pack her belongings quickly, to not get attached to places or people, to expect that they would be moving again soon. By the time Emily was 16, she had stopped asking about her mother. She knew her father would never tell her the truth, and she had begun to suspect what that truth might be. She watched him carefully, this man who had raised her, who had never raised his voice at her or struck her but who somehow made her feel afraid anyway. She watched the way he cleaned obsessively, scrubbing surfaces that were already clean. She watched the way he avoided certain topics, certain questions. She watched the way he never, ever talked about Carmichael, never mentioned the house on Sycamore Lane, never acknowledged that part of their lives had ever existed. She graduated from high school in 1987 and left home 3 days later. She had been accepted to a community college in Southern California, far enough away that she wouldn't have to see her father regularly. She packed her things, took the money she had saved from working part-time jobs, and took a bus south. Robert drove her to the bus station. He gave her an envelope with some cash inside and told her to call if she needed anything. Emily nodded, hugged him briefly, and got on the bus. She didn't look back as the bus pulled away. For the next 20 years, Emily built a life separate from her father. She finished community college, then transferred to a state university where she earned a degree in social work. She got a job working with foster children, helping kids who had experienced trauma and loss. She married a man named David Chen, a teacher she met through mutual friends. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl. Emily threw herself into being a good mother, determined to give her children what she had never had: safety, warmth, certainty. But the past doesn't stay buried forever. Emily spoke to her father perhaps twice a year, brief phone calls on his birthday and at Christmas. He never asked about his grandchildren. He never visited. Emily preferred it that way. She had built walls around that part of her life, around her childhood and her missing mother, and the questions that had no answers. Then in the spring of 2011, Emily received a phone call. Her father had fallen ill, the voice on the other end told her. He was in the hospital in Sacramento, where he had moved back to after retiring. He had been diagnosed with advanced lung disease. The doctors said he had perhaps a few months left. The hospital staff had found Emily's contact information in his personal effects and thought she should know. Emily sat with the phone in her hand for a long time after she hung up. She thought about ignoring the call, about letting her father die without seeing him again. But something pulled at her, some need for closure, some hope that maybe, after all these years, he would finally tell her the truth. She drove to Sacramento alone, not telling David where she was really going, saying only that she needed to visit an old friend. She walked into her father's hospital room in early May of 2011, 40 years almost to the month after her mother had disappeared. Robert lay in the bed, thin and gray, oxygen tubes in his nose, his breathing labored and shallow. He looked at her when she entered, recognition flickering in his eyes. "Emily," he said, his voice raspy. "You came." She pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. She looked at this man, her father, who was now 73 years old and dying. And she asked him the question she had been holding inside for nearly 4 decades. "What happened to my mother?" Robert closed his eyes. His hands rested on top of the blanket, spotted and trembling. For a long moment he said nothing. Emily waited. She had waited 40 years. She could wait a little longer. "I don't know," Robert finally said. "She left." "I've told you that." "No," Emily said, her voice steady. "Tell me the truth. I deserve the truth." Robert opened his eyes and looked at her. And in that look, Emily saw something she had never seen before. Not guilt exactly, not remorse, but something else. Recognition, perhaps. An acknowledgement that the lie could no longer be maintained. "Tell me," Emily said again, but Robert turned his head away. "I'm tired," he said. "You should go." Emily left the hospital that day without answers. She drove back to Southern California feeling hollowed out, disappointed but not surprised. Her father would take his secrets to the grave, she thought. The truth would die with him. She was wrong. Part 4. The revelation. Robert Hartwell died on June 3, 2011, in the Sacramento hospital where he had spent his final weeks. Emily arranged a simple funeral service, attended by a handful of people from his retirement community who had known him slightly. There was no eulogy. Robert had left no instructions about what he wanted said or done. They buried him in a cemetery outside Sacramento, a modest headstone marking the spot. Emily stood at the graveside and felt nothing. No grief, no relief, just a vast emptiness where answers should have been. But something had shifted in Emily during those final weeks of her father's life. The question she had asked him in the hospital room had opened something inside her, some need to know the truth no matter how terrible it might be. She had lived her entire life under the shadow of her mother's disappearance. She had built a life, raised children, become a person, all while carrying the weight of not knowing. Now, with her father dead, she finally had the freedom to look for answers without worrying about what it would do to him. 3 weeks after the funeral, Emily was sorting through her father's belongings in his small apartment. There wasn't much. Robert had lived simply, owned little, kept nothing that wasn't necessary. Emily worked methodically, separating items into boxes. Things to donate, things to discard, things to keep. She wasn't keeping much. A few photographs, some documents. His military service records from when he had been in the Navy before she was born. In the back of the bedroom closet, behind a stack of old shoe boxes, Emily found a small metal lockbox. It was the kind of box people kept important documents in, fireproof, with a simple key lock. The box was locked, but Emily found the key taped to the underside of it, as if her father had wanted it to be found eventually but not easily. Inside the box were several items. Her parents' marriage certificate, her own birth certificate. Her mother's death certificate, no, not a death certificate. A petition for declaration of death in absentia, filed in 1978, 7 years after Diana had disappeared. Legal documents regarding the sale of the house on Sycamore Lane, and at the bottom, a small spiral notebook with a blue cover, the kind students use in school. Emily opened the notebook. The pages were filled with her father's neat, precise handwriting, dates, times, notes. She read the first entry, dated October 13, 1971, the day after her mother disappeared. Spoke with Detective Morrison for second time, told him same story. He doesn't believe me, can see it in his eyes, need to be careful, need to stay consistent. Emily's hands began to shake. She turned the pages, reading entry after entry. Her father had kept a record, a detailed account of his interactions with law enforcement, what he had said, what they had asked, what he thought they suspected. It read like a manual for maintaining a lie, for keeping a story straight over time.